Are you tired on wasting material when cutting, for example, skirting boards in those strange angles? When your walls meet together at very wide open angles, or maybe actually they are very sharp and narrow. In today's video, I'm going to show you an exact process how to utilize your mitre saw to actually cut out these acute and obtuse angles without any issues and perfect each time. Watch the video. I've prepared two mock-ups of walls, one this really wide angle, an obtuse angle, and we've got one that's an acute angle. Okay, acute angle is something below 90 degrees, whereas obtuse angle is more than 90 and less than 180. Okay, so we're going to cover both scenarios, how to cut these angles on a normal mitre saw. And as an example for a project, it will be skirting boards. Okay, however, this type of cutting the angles on a mitre saw will apply to absolutely any scenario. Okay, not just skirting boards. Recently, I've actually created a video on how to cut the outside corners as well. So if you need information on that, I'm going to leave a link to that video down below in the description of this one and in the pinned comment as well, so you can straight away find it quite easily. But now let's carry on. Let's mark up our pieces and I'm going to show you the whole process. Now we're going to start with the wide angle here, as I think that's going to be the most common one. If you're putting skirting boards, that is, I don't think you're going to come across many of these really sharp angles when it comes to skirting boards. However, that may interest you more if you're doing, I don't know, let's say Christmas stars or anything like that. That's going to be more usable for your projects. However, this will be most common for skirting boards. So let's just offer our skirting boards, and they need to meet right in the middle for a perfect joint. Now, how do you do it? First of all, actually, we need to measure this angle. Now, the tool I'm actually going to be using to find out the angle of our wall is a digital angle finder. Okay, they're very cheap and they will really help you out in this type of task. So let's just turn it on and let's find out the angle here. And as you can see, the angle of our walls is 110 degrees. Right, and so the angle on our walls is 110 degrees. So we need to divide it by 2. And in total, we do get 2 angles by 55 degrees. We've got 2 pieces, 2 angles need to be cut. And now I'm going to explain to you how to actually find that angle on your mitre saw. Now, every single mitre saw will have the scale of angles. So the indicator now is at 0 degrees, and then you got 5, 10, 15 and so on. However, that 0 degrees actually represents a 90 degree. Okay, so you got your fence here that is square to the line of cut, okay, and that's creating a 90 degree cut. If your mitre saw is set up to 0 degrees, you are actually cutting a 90 degree angle, and as we move to the left or to the right, we'll be decreasing from that 90. So you're going to have 90, 85, 80, 75, 70, 65, 60 and so on. Okay, these are our angles, and in our case we need 55 degrees. So we actually got 90, 80, 70, 60 and that's 55. So the actual angle we're going to be cutting out is 35 on this scale on your mitre saw, but in reality it's 55. Therefore we need to move our mitre to 35 degrees. However, I also want to show you the position of these boards as we're going to be cutting them out in correlation to the position of the mitre saw. So I'm in front of these 2 boards, and for me this is my left side and this is my right side. And let's take one of them to the mitre saw and I'll show you how to position them correctly, so you are actually cutting out the inside corner and not the outside corner. Alright, so I picked up the left side piece and I'm going to put it on the left hand side of the mitre saw with the mitre heading towards the left hand side. Okay, and that's the correct orientation for us to cut the inside corner. So let's make the cut. And that's how it should be looking like. Now it's time for the right side, and I'm going to place it on the right hand side as that's the edge I want to cut off. However, we now need to move our mitre to the other side, to the right hand side, okay? So let's shift it over to 35 on the right hand side. And that's how it should be looking like. Let's see if we manage to cut everything correctly and if these two boards are actually fitting our wall. So let's have a go at it. And check that out. They're meeting right in the corner absolutely perfectly. As you can see, that was quite simple and easy to do. Alright, so one is done. Now it's time for the sharp angle, for the acute angle. And there is a small trick you need to do to actually be able to cut these angles out. First of all though, let's measure it and see what is the actual angle here. And hopefully, as you can see, we do have a 60-degree angle. So 60 divided by 2 equals 30. We need those two pieces to be cut to 30-degree angles. So let's have a look on the mitre saw what type of scale we've got there. Now, as you remember, the 0 is actually 90. So let's go. 90, 80, 70, 60, 50 and 40. My mitre saw doesn't go that far, and there is a trick to actually change this. In the 0 position, we are cutting a 90-degree angle here. So what we need to do is to create a new fence that will reduce this 90-degree angle. And to be absolutely honest with you, you can do any angle as long as it will give you the end result that you are after. However, most common one is actually a 45-degree angle. So move your mitre saw to 45 degrees, lock it in place. Next, grab yourself a chunky piece of material. Why so chunky? Well, if you want to cut something that's a little bit wider, for example like a skirting board, it will give you more support. Simple as that. You don't have to have something as thick as this. However, if you are cutting something wide, I do recommend to have a quite chunky piece. Offer it to our mitre saw. Okay, we're going to be cutting out that 45-degree angle, and what we need to do is to clamp it down. Okay, my saw does have this really nice clamp, so I can clamp this in place and make sure you actually clamp it down to the unmoving part of your mitre saw, as we are going to be changing the angle here. Okay, now if you don't have a clamping system on your mitre saw, you can use double-sided tape or painter's tape and a bit of CA glue just to hold this down in place so it doesn't move on you. And now make sure that this doesn't move. We can move our mitre to 0 degrees, lock it in place. And now that's our new fence, and we actually divided the 90-degree angle in half. Okay, so as you offer your piece to your mitre saw right now with this mitre saw set up to 0 degrees, okay, previously known as 90, we are actually going to be cutting 45 degrees. Why? Because we divided the 90 in half, and that 0 there, it's not 90, but it is actually 45 degrees now with the new fence. So with the new fence in place, that 0 is now 45, 40, 35, 30. Okay, the 15 degrees is actually our 30-degree cut. 30 plus 15 equals 45. So let's move our mitre to 15 degrees and let's lock it in place. And in this way we can offer our piece to the mitre saw. Now, as you can see, my hand potentially could be quite close to the blade itself. So you need to think about solutions of how to make sure your hand is away from the blade, but you still have got a firm grip on your material. Now, there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can put double-sided tape here, or the painter's tape with a bit of CA glue in between, or actually you know, we do have a massive surface over here, so you can put the double-sided tape on this block and just tape it like that, and you're going to have nice and stable connection. However, in my case, I'm going to be using the painter's tape and a bit of CA glue. But before I'm going to do that, I'm going to mark up our pieces left and right, so you're going to see the exact orientation of these on the mitre saw. So I've got my left hand side piece, the fence is on the left hand side, and the angle on the mitre saw is facing towards the left hand side as well. Okay, and the actual angle we need to be cutting is like so. Okay, so that edge needs to be taken off, and as you put it in this direction like so, that's exactly what we're going to be cutting. So let's add a bit of painter's tape to our piece. And a dab of CA. Leave it for a few seconds and we can make the cut. And that's the angle we've got. Now it's time for the right hand side. Okay, so what you could potentially do is to move the fence to the other side and to move the angle on the mitre saw to the right hand side as well. However, you don't have to do that. Okay, let's just mark up our angle. So this is the way we're going to be cutting out. That's what we need to remove just here. So if you don't want to move the fence and the mitre saw and just use it as that, so what you need to do with this piece is just to put it in the right orientation. First of all, what I'm going to do, the face of this board needs to be facing our new fence. Okay. However, if we put it like that, we are cutting the incorrect angle. So what you need to do is to flip it. So now the face of our board is facing outwards and the top of our board has now become the bottom of our board. Okay, and when you cut this piece in this orientation, everything will be perfect. However, if you don't want to get confused, you can shift the fence and the mitre saw to the right hand side. For me, this is just quicker and easier. So again, I'm gonna put a piece of painter's tape and a bit of CA glue. And that's our right side corner. And now let's have a look if we managed to cut everything correctly. Check that out. Absolutely perfect corner there. 60 degrees to 30-degree cuts. And as you can see, it's a fairly simple process, and I'm hoping my video actually showed you how simple it is, and there's something that you can follow on now to get your cuts absolutely perfect each time. If you did enjoy today's video and it brought you some good information, then please drop me that big like button down below and maybe share this video with some family and friends that actually may need this information in the future. And at this point, I just wanted to say a massive thank you to my Patreons for the ongoing support of my channel and what I do. If you do want to join my Patreon or maybe just buy me a coffee, then there's some links down below in the description of this video. And if you decide to support me, thank you very much. Now, before you go, check out these two cool playlists, plenty of fantastic videos there. Click on those and maybe you'll find your next video. Till then, take care.